High up in the mountains of Mexico, there's this city, and honestly, it really shouldn't even be there. We're talking about a massive metropolis built on a mountaintop that was literally flattened miles away from any river or lake. It's called Monte Albán, and today we're going to try and unpack the incredible secrets of this ancient Zapotec capital.
Just look at this. I mean, this is not your typical ancient city, right? It's not nestled in some convenient valley or built along a big river. No, this is a city that was literally carved out of a mountaintop. They intentionally flattened the entire peak. The ambition here is just, wow, it's stunning. And it really makes you wonder.
And when I say mountaintop, I really mean it. The main plaza sits more than 1,300 feet above the valley floor. To put that in perspective, that's kind of like deciding to build your capital city on top of the Empire State Building. The amount of work that would have taken, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around.
So that really brings us to the core mystery of this place, doesn't it? Why? Why go to all that trouble? Why build this incredible city so far from water, on a ridge that's easy to defend, sure, but super difficult to get to? I mean, it's the big question, the one that archaeologists have been obsessed with for more than 100 years.
Okay, so before we can really tackle the why, we've got to get a handle on the what and the where. So let's dive in and get our bearings in this amazing city above the clouds.
All right, so let's get some of the basics down. First off, the sheer scale of this place is just staggering. We're talking about a city that was the heart of the Zapotec civilization for nearly 1,000 years. Think about that, from around 500 BC all the way to 1000 AD. And it's so incredibly well preserved that it's now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which is a huge deal.
And that location, it wasn't just for the views, It was absolutely brilliant strategically. From this one spot, the rulers of Monte Albán could look out and control all three of the great valleys that make up the Valley of Oaxaca. This wasn't just a city, it was a fortress, a seat of power, built to intimidate anyone who looked up at it.
So how does a city like this even come to be? Well, what's really fascinating is that it didn't just grow slowly over centuries, like most cities do. No, the evidence suggests it popped up almost overnight. It was a sudden event that archaeologists have a pretty cool name for: the Great Consolidation.
Okay, so picture this. Before 500 BC, this specific mountaintop was completely empty. Down in the valleys, you had all these different towns, these competing chiefdoms, all kind of vying for power and resources. And right in the middle of them was this contested no man's land, a buffer zone that nobody really controlled. And it's right there, in that neutral zone, that our story really kicks off.
The leading theory for how this happened has a fancy name, Synoikism. But the idea behind it is actually pretty radical and amazing. It suggests that instead of one group conquering the mountain, all these rival villages, they came together. They literally abandoned their old homes and collectively decided to build a brand new unified capital, right smack in the middle of that neutral territory we were just talking about.
So get this. This wasn't just people slowly moving over time. It was a deliberate, calculated political move. This was state building 101. They were creating a capital city from scratch with one goal in mind: to unify a whole fractured region under one banner.
And you know what? It worked. Oh my gosh, did it work. This one single act of coming together, it created a regional superpower that would go on to dominate the area for 1,000 years. Absolutely incredible.
So let's walk through the timeline because it's a really dramatic story. The city gets its start around 500 BC. Fast forward a few hundred years to 100 BC, and boom, it's the capital of this expanding state. It hits its absolute peak between 200 and 500 AD, and it's so powerful it's even dealing with the other great superpower of the era, the legendary city of Teotihuacan. But then, like all great empires, its power starts to fade, and by around 1000 AD, the city is pretty much empty.
Now, the heart of this whole empire was the main plaza. And this thing was huge, a massive, perfectly flat space that was over 300 meters long. We're talking more than 3 football fields. Archaeologists think the entire population of the city could fit in here for these huge state rituals, these big public displays designed to show everyone just how powerful their rulers and their gods really were.
So you might be asking, how on earth do we know all this stuff? Well, the Zapotecs didn't leave behind books, but they did leave something even more permanent: incredible clues carved right into the stones of their city.
Okay, take a look at these carvings. For centuries, when early explorers saw these, they saw art. They saw these figures in what looked like flowing, contorted poses, and they gave them a really romantic name, Los Danzantes, which means the dancers. It's a nice, peaceful idea, right?
Well, the reality is, a lot darker. A much, much grimmer story. When archaeologists took a closer look, they figured out the truth. These are not dancers. They're captives. They're naked, tortured, and sacrificed prisoners of war. I mean, some of them are even carved with their names, acting as this permanent public trophy wall of all the enemies Monte Albán had defeated.
And then there's this building. This is Building J, and it is a total oddball. Look at it. It's shaped like an arrowhead, and it's completely out of alignment with every other building in the plaza. That strange shape, plus its unique astronomical alignment, tells us this thing had a very, very special purpose.
So what was it for? Well, its walls are just covered in these carved stone slabs. The famous archaeologist who did a lot of the early work here, Alfonso Caso, he had a name for them. He called them conquest slabs. He was convinced they were basically a public record, a list of all the places Monte Albán had conquered and controlled.
Basically, this was propaganda carved in stone. There are more than 40 of these slabs, and they show these specific place name symbols, often with an upside-down head underneath them, which is a pretty clear message, right? It symbolizes a conquered ruler. And what's really amazing is that modern archaeologists have gone out to some of the regions named on these stones, and yep, they found evidence that confirms the Zapotecs really did take them over.
But as we all know, no empire lasts forever. So what happened to this Zapotec superpower? What was the final chapter? And what's its legacy for us today? Well, starting around 500 AD, that powerful unified state they had so carefully built started to crack. Other towns down in the valley began to flex their muscles and assert their own independence. The central power of the great mountaintop capital just slowly faded away, until eventually the city was almost completely abandoned.
Of course, today, Monte Albán has a new life as this stunning archaeological park. The main ceremonial center has been so carefully restored, and now more than 400,000 visitors every year get to walk through the exact same plazas, past the very same temples as the ancient Zapotecs did thousands of years ago. It's pretty cool.
But its story isn't over, and it's not all easy. The site faces some very real modern threats. You have the city of Oaxaca growing and encroaching on areas that haven't even been excavated yet. And get this, the ancient site is actually split between 4 different modern-day municipalities. So trying to get everyone on the same page for a unified preservation plan, yeah, that's a huge challenge.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big question. We've learned so much from reading the stories they carved into these stones, but huge parts of the city are still buried, completely unexcavated. So you have to wonder, after more than 1,000 years of silence, what other secrets are still waiting down there in the stones of Monte Albán?